There are phone calls you answer, and phone calls that answer you. The ones that reach through the line and rearrange something in your chest before you've said a word. I have had two of those in my life. One was from a hospital. One was from Nadia. This is about Nadia. My name is Cal Merritt. I was 34, a structural engineer, which is the kind of job people nod at politely without really knowing what it means. What it means is this. I spend my days figuring out what's holding something up, and whether it will keep holding. Bridges, buildings, the invisible load paths that let a structure stand long after the people who built it are gone. I got into it because I liked the honesty of it. Physics doesn't negotiate. Either the thing holds or it doesn't. You do the math, you check the math, you trust the math. I had always wished more of life worked that way. I had been living in Raleigh for 6 years at that point. I owned a house with a porch I used too rarely, and a magnolia tree in the backyard that was older than anyone I knew. I was, by most external measures, fine. I went to work. I came home. I kept a small number of people I trusted, a shorter list I would actually call if something went wrong, and at the very top of that list, for 11 years without interruption, was a man named Marcus Osei. Marcus was the kind of friend you don't explain to people. You just say my best friend and hope they understand what you mean by that you have spent enough time in someone's company to stop pretending around them, to be exactly who you are without any particular effort, and to know without checking that they'll do the same. We had met in our first week of graduate school, same seminar on load distribution, same long table, and Marcus had leaned over partway through and whispered that the professor's coffee mug was structurally unsound, and he gave it 3 sessions, maybe 4. He was right. It cracked on a Tuesday afternoon 4 weeks in. I was sitting 2 seats away, and I heard it happen, and I looked over, and Marcus was looking back at me with an expression of complete calm, like a man who had already filed this result. That's who he was. He saw things coming. Not because he was cynical, the opposite. He paid very close attention, and what close attention does, if you have the patience for it, is tell you the truth about things. He died of a cardiac event at 37, alone in his apartment in Chapel Hill on a Wednesday in March. He was found by his neighbor, who had been bringing him a meal. He had called his sister 2 days before about a podcast. That was Marcus. Making time for a podcast conversation 2 days before the end, not knowing it was the end, which is either the worst part or the only merciful part, depending on how you hold it. I've held it both ways. I had met Nadia at his birthday dinner about 4 years before any of this. She was Marcus's younger sister by 3 years, which made her 31 at the time, and she had his same quality of attention, that way of looking at something until she actually saw it, rather than just registering its surface and moving on. She was a writer. Not the kind people imagine when they hear the word. She wrote about infrastructure, about public systems, about what cities reveal about the people who built them. She wrote a piece about pedestrian bridge design that Marcus forwarded to me half-joking, knowing I'd either be annoyed that a non-engineer had explained load paths more clearly than most engineers could, or that I'd recognize something worthwhile. I wasn't annoyed. I read it 3 times in a row. The 3rd time slowly. I'd seen her at maybe half a dozen things over those 4 years. His birthday, twice. A going-away party for a mutual friend. A long weekend in the Blue Ridge that Marcus organized with 6 people. Too much food, and not enough chairs. She was easy to be around. She was also easy to think about after you'd been around her. I had never done anything about either of those things because she was Marcus's sister, and Marcus was Marcus, and some lines you don't walk up to without being invited. So that was the landscape. And then it was midnight on a Wednesday in March, and my phone rang. I was awake because I'd been working late on a bridge assessment, sitting at my kitchen table with structural drawings spread across the whole surface, and a mug of cold coffee I'd stopped noticing an hour earlier. The ring cut into the quiet the way a phone ring does at midnight, with a kind of authority daytime calls don't have. Nadia. That was the first strange thing. She didn't call me. We weren't not friends, but we weren't call each other people. We were Marcus's orbit people. We existed in relation to him. I answered, Cal. Her voice was wrong immediately. Not wrong like anger, wrong like she was using everything she had just to be audible. He's gone. Marcus is gone. It was his heart. They said it was his heart. They said it happened. She stopped. The phone filled with a sound I recognized as someone trying to stay above something that was pulling them under. I said his name. I don't know why. Like saying it might mean something different than what she'd just told me. He's been gone for 3 hours, she said. I didn't know who to call first. A breath. I need you here. Can you come here? She was at her parents' house in Durham. 40 minutes. I drove it in 32. I don't remember what the roads looked like. I remember the magnolia in my headlights when I backed out of the driveway. The branches bare still. March not yet finished with being winter. And then I remember her front door, which was yellow, and which I had stood at twice in my life, and then her in it before I even knocked. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt that was too big for her, and she had been crying for hours. Her eyes swollen, her face bare and undefended, in the way faces get when they've stopped caring about being seen. She looked at me for a moment with something that wasn't quite surprise, like she had made herself believe I would come, and had not quite been certain until now. I didn't say anything useful. There was nothing useful. I stepped forward and she came into it, and I held her there in the doorway, with the March air coming in cold around us, and the yellow door still open behind her, and she cried in a way that didn't ask for anything from me except to stay there. So I stayed. I didn't know who else, she said, against my shoulder. I know, I said. I know. Their parents were inside. Her mother, Helen, was at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her, and her face doing something I didn't have a word for. The particular stillness of a person who has received news too large to process while it's still arriving, who has set down every other thing and is simply waiting to understand what has happened to her. Her father James was on the phone in the other room, the low, careful voice of a man making arrangements he had hoped he would never make. I sat with Helen for a while. I made tea that no one drank. I found the tissues that were nearly out and located a new box in the hall closet, which felt like the most useful thing I did all night. I listened to James on the phone with the funeral home coordinator and handed him a pen when he needed one. I did the small things that the situation makes room for because someone has to do the small things. I was good at small things. I had always been good at those. At some point after 2 in the morning, James came and sat beside Helen and took her hands. And Nadia appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at me and tipped her head slightly toward the back of the house. I followed her out to the back porch. It was cold. She had put on thick wool socks at some point, the kind that meant you'd gone looking for warmth in the things you could reach, and she had her arms wrapped around herself, looking out at the backyard, dark except for the porch light catching the edge of a bird bath near the fence, which had a thin skin of ice on the water. Late winter holding on. He called me Tuesday, she said. 2 days ago, he called me about a podcast he wanted me to listen to. We talked for 20 minutes. She shook her head slowly, not in anger, in something more bewildered than that. And I was only half there, because I was trying to finish something, and I kept thinking, I'll call him back, I'll actually listen and call him back and we'll talk about it properly. She stopped. I'm not going to get to call him back. Nadia. I know. She pressed her lips together. I know it's not. I know. It's just the 20 minutes. I looked out at the bird bath. He knew you, I said. That's not something I'm saying because it helps. Marcus could read a room from the parking lot. He could tell you what someone was actually thinking from the way they held a glass. He knew when you were distracted. He called you anyway because the 20 minutes mattered to him, and not because you owed him full attention, because he just wanted to hear you. That was always enough for him. She was quiet for a moment. That's very him, she said. Yes, I said. She exhaled slowly. The cold turned it visible, then it was gone. We stood out there for a long time without talking, the kind of quiet that you fall into together rather than being pushed into alone. The porch light hummed. Somewhere down the street a dog said something brief, and then went back to sleep. The ice on the bird bath caught the light in a way that made it look like it was thinking. I'm glad you came, she said. There was nowhere else I was going to be, I said. She looked at me then. Really looked. All the way down to whatever was underneath, the way she had that quality of doing. I held it. Not because it was easy, because looking away would have been the wrong thing, and I knew it. You were his best friend, she said. He was mine, I said. She nodded once, slowly, like something had been said that had needed saying for the last 3 hours and could now be put down. I stayed until after 4 in the morning, left when her father fell asleep in the armchair with his phone still in his hand, and her mother had finally gone to lie down. Nadia walked me to the front door and stood on the cold porch step in her socks. Thank you, she said. Don't. I'm going to anyway. Okay, I said. She hugged me again before I got in the car. Not the doorway hold from 3 hours earlier. That one had been falling into something. This was different. Her arms around me, and her head just below my chin, and a moment of stillness that lasted exactly as long as it was supposed to, and not 1 second passed. The kind of hug that is also a sentence. I drove home with the windows down because I needed the cold. The next few months were what they were. There are things that happen after you lose someone like Marcus, and none of them are things you can prepare for by being reasonable. The first week is logistics, which is almost a mercy. Things to do with your hands, somewhere to send the part of you that cannot just stand still and absorb it. The funeral was the following Saturday. The church filled and then kept filling, into the vestibule and out the side door, because Marcus had known everyone, the way some people just do, as though they have more surface area for the world than the rest of us. I sat near the front with the family because Helen had asked me to. Nadia was beside me for most of it. At one point during the service, she reached over without looking at me and found my hand in my lap and held it for about 2 minutes, her eyes forward, her jaw set. Then let go. I didn't say anything, neither did she. There wasn't anything to say that the gesture hadn't already said. In the weeks after that, the grief had its ordinary architecture, the calls to close out accounts, the apartment in Chapel Hill, the particular exhaustion of explaining to people who hadn't heard yet, and watching their faces go through the information. I did a version of all of it alongside the family because they were my family now, in the specific way that loss makes people your family. You have held the same weight, and that is a kind of kinship nothing else is. Nadia and I drove up to Chapel Hill together on a Saturday in April to help her parents begin sorting Marcus's apartment. We didn't talk much on the way up. On the way back, we talked for the entire 45 minutes with the windows cracked and a bag of his books on the back seat between us. Because some things are easier to say in a car, facing forward, moving. She told me about a piece she was trying to write and couldn't. A train station in a city I'd never been to. She'd been trying to write it for 3 months before Marcus died, and she still couldn't find the angle in. "What are you trying to say?" I asked. "That the design of a place decides what's possible in it," she said. "That you can build something that makes people more themselves, more open to each other, and most built environments do the opposite. They make people smaller, more defended, and the ones that don't." She stopped. "That's the thing. That's what I want to explain, and I can't find the door into it." "You just walked through it," I said. She looked at me. "In the car," I said. "Just now. That was the essay." She was quiet for a long time. "That's not an essay," she said finally. "That's a sentence. Start with the sentence." She turned back toward the window. Something happened in her profile. A small release. A muscle she'd been holding without knowing it. "He always said you were the most useful person he knew," she said. "I didn't fully know what he meant until tonight." I kept my eyes on the road. The Piedmont moved past in the dark, pine trees and red clay, and the distant glow of things too far off to name. "He told me you were the most honest person he knew," I said. I thought I understood what he meant by that. "I'm still learning." She didn't answer right away. When she did, she said quietly, "Me too. I want to be careful here, because Marcus deserves that." I did not fall in love with his sister in those months. That's not what happened, and it wouldn't be honest to say it that way. What happened was slower, and more deliberate, and more earned than that. I had always noticed Nadia. I told you that from the start. I had always kept a line between noticing and anything else, out of loyalty to Marcus, and out of the simpler knowledge that some things aren't yours to reach for. And after he died, the last thing I let myself think about was any of that. We were in grief. You don't reach for anything new in grief. You hold on to what you have and you try to keep standing. But something happened in the space of that year that I only know how to describe accurately, not neatly. We started calling each other. Not about logistics, not about the estate, not because there was a reason, just to talk. Sunday afternoons, sometimes. She'd call while she was walking, and I'd be on the porch with a coffee, and we'd go an hour without any direction at all. About work, about books, about a documentary she'd seen, about a load-bearing detail in a building I was reviewing that had made me stop and look at it 3 times. She asked good questions, the kind that tell you something about the person asking, because good questions come from having actually listened to the thing before them. I'd finish a call and realize the light had changed while we were talking, that an hour had gone somewhere I hadn't felt leave. She sent me a draft of the train station piece in July and asked what I thought, and I told her, and she sent back 3 pages of argument about my notes, and that went back and forth for a week and a half, and it was the most energized I'd felt since February. In September, she came to Raleigh for a conference, and we had dinner at a restaurant downtown. It ran 4 hours. We closed it by existing in it. She laughed at something I said with her whole face, not the polite kind. The kind that takes a person over before they decide to let it. And I thought, there it is. The thing I'd been not thinking about for years, sitting across a white tablecloth from me in a blue dress, gesturing with her fork to make a point about a parking structure she'd seen that afternoon. I walked her to her hotel. At the door, she turned around. "This was good," she said. "Yes," I said. "Cal." She said my name with that specific weight again, the same weight it had at midnight in March. "I've been thinking about something and I don't know if I should say it." "You should," I said. "You always should." She looked at me for a moment, the way she looked at things, all the way down to the bottom of them. "He would have wanted this," she said. "Whatever this is, he would have thought it was exactly right. He probably would have been unbearable about it." Something in my chest tightened and then released. "He would have had a spreadsheet," I said. She laughed. "A real one," surprised out of her. "He absolutely would have had a spreadsheet." "I know," I said. "I know he would have wanted this. I just needed to say it out loud." She nodded once, like something that had been unsettled for a long time had been settled. "Good night, Cal." "Good night," I said. She went inside. I stood on the sidewalk longer than I needed to, looking up at the glass face of the hotel, thinking about load paths, about invisible structures, about the things that hold because of what was done right underneath, long before the surface was finished. We took our time. That was the understanding we didn't have to speak. Neither of us was interested in treating something this specific as though it were ordinary. He would have had opinions about how long we took. Loud opinions, delivered with full confidence, probably while cooking something unnecessarily ambitious and gesturing with a spatula. He would have said at some point in that particular way of his that the structural analysis was clearly complete and it was past time to break ground. He would have been insufferable about it in the most loving way possible. I think about that and it makes me miss him and it makes me smile at the same time. Grief does that eventually. It doesn't stop, it just starts to contain more than itself. Nadia published the train station piece in October. It opened with, "The design of a place decides what is possible in it." She used the sentence. She told me the night it went live, calling from her apartment after midnight, voice quiet in the way it gets when she's proud of something but hasn't said it yet. I read it twice before calling her back. The second time I found a line near the end, about how the best structures hold people at exactly the distance they need from each other, close enough to notice, far enough to choose. And I sat with that for a while before I kept reading. I told her I was going to read everything she ever wrote. She said she wanted to show me the station someday. I told her I'd go. She said, "I know you will." I did. The following spring we flew out, a city far enough to need flying. The train station was large and very carefully made, the kind of space where something happens to your posture when you walk in. You straighten without being asked. She stood beside me on the main concourse and watched me take it in, and she didn't say anything. She'd already written everything there was to say. After a while she reached over and took my hand, and we stood there together in the middle of all that deliberate space, all that structural intention, all those invisible load paths doing their work below the surface. Some things you build, some things you just finally stop standing in the way of. Have you ever gotten a phone call in the middle of the night that changed the direction of your life? Not because of what it gave you, but because of what it asked you to carry. And have you ever found someone in the middle of the hardest year and understood only later that the hardest year was what made the finding possible? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.